I gave 5 years of my life to that company. 5 years of late nights, canceled weekends, and perfect performance reviews. And yet, when the promotion finally opened up, the one I'd been quietly working toward all that time, my manager handed it to his nephew, a kid named Tyler who'd barely been in the office for 3 months. I found out in the most humiliating way possible, an email announcement congratulating him, with my own name missing from the subject line. My name is Daniel Carter. I'm 37 years old, senior systems analyst at Stratosphere Financial in Chicago, or at least I was. Until that Tuesday morning, I was the quiet guy everyone leaned on. The one who stayed late to fix the code nobody else could understand, who recovered the servers when they crashed on a holiday weekend. I wasn't flashy. I didn't push myself into meetings I didn't belong in. I thought my work would speak for itself. Turns out, in that office, the only thing that spoke louder than results was bloodlines. I remember the way Tyler strutted into the break room that morning, grinning like he'd won a championship. He told one of the interns, "Guess Uncle Frank knows talent when he sees it." I didn't say a word. I just stirred my coffee, nodded once, and walked back to my desk. Inside, though, something shifted. Not anger, not shock, something colder, like a switch had been flipped. I opened a blank document on my computer and started typing. Resignation letter. 1 page. No anger, no long explanations. Just the facts. Effective immediately, I would be leaving Stratosphere Financial. I thanked them for the opportunities, wished them continued success, and signed my name. Then I printed it, folded it carefully, and slid it into an envelope. At noon, I walked into my manager's office. Frank was leaning back in his chair, still glowing from his nephew's promotion party. I placed the envelope on his desk. He frowned, tore it open, and read the words. His face drained of color. Then he looked up at me, eyes wide. "Is this a joke?" he demanded. His voice was already rising, the calm veneer cracking. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I just said one thing, steady and clear. "Congrats to Tyler." That was it. That was all. Then I turned and walked out, leaving him sputtering behind me. The truth was, I had already been preparing for this moment without even realizing it. Years of being overlooked had taught me to document everything. My projects, my results, even the errors I had quietly fixed for others. I had files, logs, and data that painted a picture of exactly who had kept that company afloat while the executives played golf. And I knew, with absolute clarity, that this wasn't the end of my story. It was the beginning. What Frank didn't know yet, what Tyler would never even suspect, was that I had no intention of walking away quietly. Not this time. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth, and I had all the proof I needed. So when my boss shouted, demanding to know if I was serious, I kept walking. My resignation wasn't just a goodbye. It was the opening move, and the game had only just started. When I walked out of Frank's office that day, the office chatter died instantly. I didn't slam doors or throw papers like some disgruntled employee. I just carried my messenger bag, calm as ever, and left behind 5 years of quiet excellence. But what no one realized was that I hadn't left empty-handed. For years, I had been archiving my work. Every system I'd built, every bug I'd patched, every late-night recovery no one else even knew about. I had the receipts. Not out of paranoia, but out of habit. I was methodical by nature. I kept logs, screenshots, code repositories, all backed up under my own secure account. If Stratosphere Financial thought they could erase me by replacing me with Frank's nephew, they had another thing coming. That night, in my small apartment overlooking the Chicago skyline, I spread out the folders I had saved. Years of proof. I remembered each incident vividly. The day the servers went down on Black Friday, threatening millions in transactions, and I alone pulled them back online. The time a phishing attempt nearly compromised client accounts, and I patched the breach before a single dollar was lost. The executives sent out congratulatory memos to the team. But it had been me. Always me. I didn't rage. I didn't drink myself into oblivion. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote down 3 words: freeze. Track. Respond. That's how you run missions. That's how you survive. Freeze meant I wasn't going to act rashly. No late-night angry emails, no social media outbursts. Silence was my weapon now. Track meant I would follow the data. Every project, every financial decision, every inconsistency I had documented. There were patterns, and I would connect the dots. Respond meant I would strike when the time was right, not before. Timing was everything. The next morning, I logged into the company's public-facing website as a client would. I noticed glitches almost immediately. Small ones, the kind Tyler wouldn't know how to fix. Bugs that, left unchecked, could cascade into disasters. I smiled quietly to myself. Frank had handed the kingdom to his nephew, but he built that kingdom on the systems I created. Without me, it would start crumbling. Meanwhile, I called my old college friend, Mark Reynolds. He wasn't just a friend, he was a corporate attorney. Trusted, discreet. I told him I might need legal advice, confidentially. He didn't ask for details, just said, "Whenever you're ready." I also updated my LinkedIn profile, not with desperation, but with precision. I listed the high-level projects, the systems only I had built, the cost savings I had generated. I didn't need to embellish. The facts spoke louder than any marketing pitch. Within 24 hours, recruiters started reaching out. Some offering signing bonuses, some dangling senior-level titles. But I wasn't in a rush. This wasn't about finding another job yet. This was about setting the stage. Because Stratosphere Financial had made a fatal mistake. They thought loyalty meant weakness. They thought silence meant submission. What they didn't know was that silence was the sharpest blade I had, and I was about to use it. The first week after my resignation, I kept my phone silent. No emails to former coworkers, no messages to Frank, no replies to anyone asking what had happened. I wanted them to sit in the quiet, to feel the absence of the one person who held their systems together. Silence can be unsettling, and in a company like Stratosphere Financial, silence from me meant risk. I spent my time differently. Mornings at the gym, afternoons with my notebook, evenings digging into files I'd archived. I wasn't looking for revenge. I was looking for patterns. Because men like Frank didn't make reckless decisions out of loyalty alone. Promoting his nephew over me wasn't just nepotism, it was strategy. And I wanted to know why. It didn't take long before I found my first lead. Months before Tyler's promotion, I had noticed unusual vendor payments buried inside our expense reports. They weren't large enough to trigger alarms, but they were consistent, recurring transfers to a consulting firm I didn't recognize. The invoices were vague, the descriptions thin, yet the amounts had slowly crept upward. I remembered flagging one of them in my private notes, but at the time I had brushed it off. Now, with distance, it looked different. I pulled up the archived financial system access logs I had saved. That's when I saw it. The approvals hadn't come from the finance department, where they belonged. They'd come directly from Frank's account. The consulting firm's name was Ironclad Strategies. A search showed it had been registered less than a year ago. The listed address was a P.O. box in Evanston. And the owner? Tyler Ross, the same nephew who had just been promoted over me. I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. Nepotism wasn't the whole story. This was a pipeline. Frank had created a system to funnel money directly through his nephew's company. What looked like legitimate consulting fees were, in reality, inflated invoices designed to skim profit from the firm without raising suspicion. I didn't need to guess. The numbers told the story. Over the past 8 months, nearly $360,000 had been paid to Ironclad Strategies, a company with no employees, no office, no website. Just a name, a box, and a signature. For years, I had been invisible to Frank. Useful, but forgettable. That invisibility had allowed me to see things others ignored. And now, it was going to be the very thing that undid him. I knew better than to confront him directly. Men like Frank don't admit to fraud, they bury it. My job wasn't to shout. It was to keep collecting. Quietly. Methodically. Because exposing him too early would only tip him off. And once he knew I was onto him, he'd cover his tracks. So I kept my silence. On LinkedIn, my profile was lighting up with offers. On paper, I looked like the model employee suddenly available on the market. But behind the scenes, I was building a different kind of resume, one that cataloged every dollar Frank and Tyler had siphoned off the company. By the time I closed my laptop that night, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Frank hadn't just stolen my promotion. He had stolen from every employee, every shareholder, every client who trusted that company with their money. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it. By the second week, Stratosphere Financial was already starting to crack. I didn't need insider updates to know it. The signs were everywhere. Their client portal had been experiencing outages, short but noticeable. The kind of disruptions that I used to anticipate and fix before anyone noticed. Now those bugs were multiplying. And Tyler, for all his newfound authority, had no idea how to handle them. I wasn't surprised when my phone lit up with a call from one of the junior analysts I'd mentored. He didn't leave a message, and I didn't call back. The silence was deliberate. I wanted them to know what it felt like when the one person who held their fragile systems together was gone. Silence can be louder than shouting. But while they struggled with surface problems, I was digging deeper. Every invoice to Ironclad Strategies told part of the story, but I wanted the whole picture. So I went back to my backups, to the network monitoring files I had quietly copied over the years. Hidden in those logs were the approval chains, and more importantly, the timestamps. That was where the cracks widened. Frank's authorizations often came at odd hours. 2 in the morning, 4:30 on a Saturday, midnight on holidays. Not typical for a department head who usually vanished by 5. But it was consistent. Consistent enough to suggest that Frank wasn't even the one executing those approvals. Someone else had his credentials, and I had a good guess who it was. Tyler wasn't just a beneficiary of nepotism. He was actively managing the flow of money. The invoices increased in size after his promotion. What started as $10,000 a month had ballooned to nearly $50,000 by the end of my time there. Frank's signature was on the authorizations, but the timing was Tyler's. He'd been careless, and carelessness is a gift when you're building a case. I compiled everything into a folder labeled Proof. Dates, amounts, signatures, logs. Then I encrypted it and backed it up in 3 separate places. One on a secure drive, one in the cloud under a private account, and one with Mark, my attorney friend. I didn't trust anyone, not even myself, to hold all the pieces in one place. Meanwhile, I started hearing whispers. A recruiter mentioned in passing that Stratosphere had missed a deadline with one of their biggest clients. Another hinted that a compliance review was coming, and auditors had been asking about vendor expenses. That was the kind of smoke that suggested a fire was already smoldering inside. I didn't move yet. Timing mattered. If I went public now, Frank would deny everything. Tyler would vanish, and the company would bury the scandal before it could breathe. I needed them to panic first. Panic makes men sloppy. Panic exposes what silence never could. So I watched, and I waited. At night, I'd sit on my balcony, looking out over the lights of the city, calm on the outside but sharp as glass inside. I knew Frank was losing control, and Tyler was in way over his head. They didn't know it yet, but every desperate move they made was only tightening the trap I had set. It wasn't a question of if they'd fall, only when. By the 3rd week, the silence around me began to fracture. Stratosphere Financial was no longer running on autopilot. Reports of outages were spreading through industry circles, clients were posting complaints on forums, and recruiters who had been circling me like sharks started to hint at why. "Something's going on over there," one said. "Big accounts are getting nervous." That was confirmation enough. The cracks I had left behind were now widening into fault lines. It was time for the first move. Nothing loud, nothing reckless. Just enough to make Frank feel the walls shift. I crafted an anonymous email using a secure account, one designed to look like an internal system alert. The subject line was simple: vendor irregularities, urgent compliance review needed. Attached was a redacted version of the data I'd collected, just enough to show a pattern of payments to Ironclad Strategies, without revealing everything I had. It was bait. Sent not to Frank, not to Tyler, but to the company's compliance officer, a man named Richard Lowell. A man I knew from experience took regulations more seriously than his own job title. Once the message left my outbox, I closed the laptop and went for a run. I didn't need to watch what happened next. I already knew. Compliance officers don't ignore red flags, not when their names are tied to government audits. Richard would open it, see the transfers, and panic. Panic would spread upward. And Frank would realize, maybe for the first time, that someone was watching. 2 days later, I had my confirmation. A former teammate texted me, short and sharp, "Board calling emergency session. Frank's in deep." I didn't reply. I didn't need to. The silence was enough. But I wasn't done. While Frank scrambled to explain away the invoices, I prepared the next layer of evidence. This one was heavier. Server logs showing authorization patterns at impossible hours, clearly proving that Tyler had been using Frank's credentials. copies of wire transfer receipts that linked directly back to the P.O. box in Evanston, even the incorporation papers tying Ironclad Strategies to Tyler's name. I organized them into a detailed timeline, each entry precise, each detail undeniable. Mark, my attorney friend, reviewed the folder. He said one thing: when you drop this, they won't recover. His voice carried no doubt, just certainty. That night, I thought about my years at Stratosphere. The long hours, the quiet dedication, the way I'd believed loyalty mattered. But in truth, I had been preparing for this without realizing it. Every backup I made, every log I archived, every detail I saved, it wasn't just diligence. It was survival. And now, it was ammunition. Frank still believed he could contain the fire. Tyler still believed his promotion protected him. What neither of them understood was that the fire had already spread. It was inside the walls, and there was no stopping it now. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to show my face. My silence was louder than their excuses, and it was only the beginning. The emergency session happened on a Friday morning. I wasn't in the building, but I didn't need to be. Word traveled fast when executives started sweating. A contact I trusted sent me one message: Frank cornered. Board furious. Tyler not mentioned yet. That was exactly the confirmation I needed. They had seen the invoices. They knew something was rotten, but they still didn't know how deep it went. That night, I sat in my apartment with the city lights flickering against the glass. I opened the folder I'd been building, the complete record of every irregularity. Over 400 pages of transactions, log files, and documented approvals. Dates, times, amounts, signatures. It wasn't speculation. It was fact, airtight and undeniable. I didn't plan to hand it to the company. Frank would bury it if he got the chance. Tyler would vanish with whatever money he'd already siphoned. No, the board needed to see it directly, unfiltered. But even more importantly, it needed to be delivered in a way they couldn't ignore. So I prepared a second package. Not anonymous this time. My name on the front, my contact information clear. Inside was everything. The timeline, the connections, the proof that Tyler's company was nothing more than a shell designed to launder money out of Stratosphere Financial. I scheduled it to send Monday morning at 8 a.m. sharp, just before the weekly executive meeting. One click, and the board would have the truth sitting in their inboxes before Frank could spin his story. The rest of the weekend, I stayed quiet. No calls, no messages, no sudden moves. Silence was still my weapon. At 8:03 a.m. Monday, my phone started buzzing. Unknown numbers. Then blocked numbers. Then, finally, a message from my old teammate. Chaos. Board grilling Frank. Compliance in room. Tyler pale. I didn't answer. I let the silence speak for me. By noon, another message came in. Frank walked out. No word yet. I leaned back in my chair, calm as ice. I knew what was happening inside that building. The board wasn't just angry. They were scared. Scared of liability, scared of regulators, scared of headlines. And fear makes powerful men move quickly. Later that day, Mark called. He sounded almost amused. You just set off a grenade in their boardroom. I've already heard whispers that Frank might be suspended pending investigation. Tyler too. He paused. They'll try to contact you, Daniel. They'll want explanations, maybe even a deal. Don't bite. Not yet. I thanked him and ended the call. He was right. Timing mattered more than ever now. The trap was sprung, but the collapse wasn't complete. As evening fell, I checked my secure drive one last time. Everything was still there, encrypted and safe. The evidence was bulletproof. Frank had spent years building a fortress of influence, but in the end, it wasn't anger that tore it down. It was paper, signatures, numbers on a page, and me, the quiet man they thought they could ignore. By Tuesday morning, the silence inside Stratosphere had broken into open chaos. My sources told me that Frank's office was empty. His nameplate still on the door, but the man himself gone, suspended pending internal review. That phrase meant one thing. The board was protecting themselves. They were buying time before regulators forced their hand. Tyler, meanwhile, had been stripped of his title. Officially, it was called a temporary reassignment. Unofficially, it was the beginning of his downfall. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. Instead, I sat at my desk and reviewed the timeline again, line by line, making sure every detail was flawless. If this was going to stick, The evidence had to be untouchable. Frank and Tyler weren't amateurs. They would fight back with excuses, with claims of misunderstanding, with expensive lawyers. But facts don't lie, and I had more than enough of them. By midweek, the first call started. Unknown numbers, voicemails asking me to return messages from representatives of Stratosphere Financial. I didn't respond. Then came an email from one of the board members, polite but urgent, requesting a meeting. I ignored that too. Silence wasn't just my shield now. It was my pressure point. Every unanswered message tightened the noose around their necks. The more I said nothing, the louder their panic became. I heard through my contacts that Tyler had broken down in a meeting, insisting he didn't know the consulting payments were fraudulent, that it was all Frank's idea. But the timestamps told another story, one they couldn't escape. His fingerprints were all over the approvals. The nephew they'd tried to protect had become a liability. Meanwhile, I prepared the final phase. Not just emails, not just logs, but a comprehensive package formatted for regulators, auditors, and if necessary, the press. The kind of file that, once released, couldn't be buried. I didn't plan to use it yet, but I wanted it ready, like a weapon loaded and waiting. Mark called again, his tone sharp this time. They're circling you. They'll offer money, maybe even a position, just to shut you up. Don't take it. If you fold now, they win. I told them I understood. And I did. This wasn't about a severance check. It wasn't about being rehired. It was about something larger. It was about showing men like Frank that you can't silence the quiet ones forever. That evening, I walked past the Stratosphere Tower. The glass building loomed over the street, glowing under the city lights. Once, I would have felt a pang of loss. But not now. Now I felt only clarity. That building wasn't my prison anymore. It was theirs, and they were trapped inside it, panicking, scrambling, tearing each other apart. I didn't need to touch them. I just needed to keep the pressure steady. And sooner or later, the entire structure would collapse under the weight of their lies. The silence would finish what I had started. By the fourth week, Stratosphere Financial was no longer trying to contain the mess quietly. The story had started to leak beyond the boardroom walls. A trade newsletter ran a small piece about vendor irregularities and unexpected executive absences. It didn't mention names, but anyone who worked in finance could read between the lines. And once the first crack appeared, more followed. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee cooling beside me, scanning the article on my phone. I didn't feel triumph, just confirmation. The machine had started to eat itself. Regulators would follow the scent soon enough. The kind of fraudulent invoices Frank and Tyler had signed off on weren't just an embarrassment. They were a liability that could trigger investigations no company wanted. That day, I finalized the package I'd been building. A clean, comprehensive report with every piece of evidence. The invoices, the authorization logs, the incorporation documents, the timestamps. I saved 3 copies, encrypted and distributed, just like before. One with Mark, one in a secure cloud, one locked away offline. If anyone tried to bury me, the truth would still surface. That was my insurance policy. By Wednesday, another message reached me through back channels. Frank had officially been placed on leave, pending investigation. Tyler had been removed from all client-facing duties. He was still drawing a paycheck, but his office sat empty. Some said he hadn't shown up in days. Others whispered that he was cooperating with auditors. Cooperation usually meant betrayal. Nephews don't stay loyal when the walls close in. I didn't respond to any of it. Silence was my weapon, and I held it steady. Every unanswered call, every ignored message tightened the pressure. They wanted me in the room so they could control me. I refused to step inside their walls again. My fight wasn't there. It was in the shadows, where I could see everything and they couldn't see me. By Friday, the press had escalated. A regional paper ran a longer piece, this time naming Stratosphere Financial directly. The words fraud investigation appeared in print. That was the spark. Once fraud was named, larger outlets would circle, and regulators would have no choice but to act. That night, I stood on my balcony, the city sprawling beneath me. I thought about how close I had come to letting it go, to walking away quietly after that promotion was stolen. But this wasn't about me anymore. It was about everyone who had trusted that company, everyone who had been lied to while Frank and Tyler lined their pockets. I didn't need to chase revenge. I just needed to let the truth breathe. And the truth was louder than any outburst, stronger than any threat. Frank's fortress was crumbling. Tyler's inheritance was turning to ash, and I hadn't raised my voice once. The silence was doing the work for me. The investigation became official sooner than even I expected. On a Monday morning, news broke that federal auditors had been assigned to Stratosphere Financial. They weren't there for a courtesy review. They were there because something serious had been triggered. I didn't need a press release to know why. The files I delivered had done their job. The numbers couldn't be argued with. That same afternoon, one of my old colleagues left me a message. His voice was hushed, strained. He said agents were in the building, interviewing staff, seizing documents, copying hard drives. Frank's name was spoken openly now, not just in whispers. Tyler's too. There was no more pretending this was about accounting errors. This was fraud, and everyone knew it. I didn't call him back. I didn't call anyone. The silence had become my signature. I wasn't going to break it now. By Wednesday, the first arrests were made. Tyler was taken in, not in handcuffs, but in that careful, quiet way they use when someone is about to make a deal. Frank followed 2 days later, his face pale, as he was escorted past reporters. I saw the footage online. He didn't look like the powerful manager who once smirked across his desk at me. He looked like a man stripped of his armor, exposed to the light he thought he could avoid forever. Mark called me that night. His voice carried the satisfaction I didn't need to say out loud. They've charged him with wire fraud and conspiracy. Tyler too. This isn't going away for them, Daniel. I listened, silent for a long moment, then simply said, good. The truth was, I didn't feel triumph. Not yet. What I felt was a steady, cold clarity. They had built their empire on lies and nepotism, and it was collapsing piece by piece. And all I had done was document, prepare, and wait. The press had shifted tone by then. It wasn't just trade journals and regional papers anymore. National outlets were running headlines about fraud at a Midwestern financial firm. Frank's face was plastered on screens he couldn't turn off. Tyler's name was dragged through the same mud. He thought his uncle's promotion had lifted him above. And me? I remained invisible. My name wasn't in any of the stories. I hadn't sought credit, hadn't spoken to a single reporter. I didn't need to. The evidence spoke for itself. My silence was louder than any interview could have been. As I watched the coverage that Friday night, I thought back to that moment in Frank's office, the envelope in his hand, his voice cracking as he demanded, "Is this a joke?" It hadn't been a joke. It had been the first move in a quiet war he never saw coming. And now, it was almost over. The silence had carried me this far. One more step, and the final account would be closed. The final blow didn't come with a bang, but with a press release. Stratosphere Financial announced that Frank Ross and his nephew Tyler had both been terminated, effective immediately. The language was sterile, corporate, but the truth rang louder than any statement could hide. They were gone. Finished. Stripped of their positions, their reputations, and soon, their freedom. I read it in silence, sitting at my desk with the window open to the cool Chicago night. The city carried on below me, unaware of the quiet war that had just ended. For everyone else, it was just another scandal. For me, it was closure. I didn't return to Stratosphere. They offered. A board member reached out through Mark, saying they wanted to rebuild, that they needed someone with my knowledge, my integrity. But I wasn't interested. I had already given them 5 years. 5 years of loyalty, of perfect performance, of quiet dedication. And in return, they had handed everything to a nephew who hadn't earned a single ounce of it. No, my future wasn't inside those glass walls anymore. Instead, I accepted an offer from a rival firm, one that had been chasing me since the day I updated my LinkedIn profile. They didn't want me because of my silence. They wanted me because of what my silence had proven, that I could see what others missed, that I could survive betrayal without breaking, that I could dismantle a fortress without raising my voice. On my first day at the new office, I walked past a row of desks filled with young analysts. They looked at me with the same uncertainty I once saw in Stephen, the junior I had mentored at Stratosphere. I gave a small nod, calm and steady. I wasn't there to tell stories. I was there to build something stronger. Later that week, I opened my old notebook, the one where I'd written 3 words: freeze, track, respond. I added a 4th word underneath: rebuild. Because that's what silence leaves behind. Not ashes, not ruins, but the space to construct something better. Frank and Tyler would face their consequences in courtrooms and headlines. Their names would carry the weight of fraud long after the money was counted. But I didn't need to see it. My part was done. I hadn't shouted. I hadn't begged. I hadn't raised my voice once. And yet, I had won. As I closed the notebook, I felt the quiet settle around me. It wasn't the silence of defeat anymore. It was the silence of completion. The silence of a man who had walked away not broken, but unshaken. Some men fight back with noise. I chose silence. And in the end, silence was louder than anything they could have imagined. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.